Oh,
Totally
that's fine.
cured.
She's fine now. Now
Yeah,
she's out and about and roaming.
giving it to everyone. No, she's all healed up now. She's all, what'd you say, cured. No more
Cute.
viral. Cured like a ham. Hello and welcome to the QUACKCAST. This is QUACKCAST number 566. Ozone Ocean, with me is Tanserine. Hello, Tans.
Hello.
And this week we're talking about immersion, but not breaking immersion or how to get people immersed, but actually the feeling of being immersed in the fiction that you're enjoying, or fact, or whatever, the media that you're enjoying. That's what I should say. Being immersed and how great it can feel, and how bad it can feel when it's no more. So that's what we're going to talk about. But before we do that, to bring up the featured comic feature this week, Kwai gave us a feature. So Kwai is telling us about her first feature of 2022, I think. I don't know, maybe it's the second. Probably the second. Okay, it's the second feature of 2022. It is Interstellar Battle Girls League of Super Warriors. Oh my god, such a long title. Take it away, Kwai, with that.
Hello, this is QUACKCAST, and the feature I've selected for this week is Interstellar Battle Girls League of Super Warriors by Bravo 1102, and it is rated M for mature. First, there was the Battle Girl League. Then came the Femoids. But once humans wanted to join in on the action, the Battle Girls League of Super Warriors was formed. The rumble between Dark Sword and Passion Pink has just begun. Here in this comic lies a range of mixed martial arts to melee weapons, fist fighting to sword fighting, wardrobe malfunction antics, and interactions between interstellar individuals. This series celebrates a long-awaited return to a comic style that showcases set design, comic design, script writing, and customized body sculpting skills. There are several cameos of familiar faces from Bravo 1102's other comics, such as Battle of the Robo-Femoids. Learn whether White Dancer or Masked Ginger was victorious and read Interstellar Battle Girls League of Super Warriors by Bravo 1102, rated M.
And that was our featured comic. Thank you very much for that, Kwai. Interstellar Battle Girls League of Super Warriors. That's a comic by Bravo, who is really good with coming up with long titles. In all capitals. Okay, that's a cool title. So next up we have our featured music. This week Gunn Wallace has given us the theme to Dude in Distress, which was a comic that was featured a while ago. I think Kwai probably featured that one, I'm not sure. Dude in Distress. A classical slow dancing promenade. Careful steps in satin slippers on mirror-polished wood. At full speed, we're launched into relentless movement. Hydraulic electric servos of enormous power push us ever on, altering the world in unimaginable and extreme ways. So take it away, Gunn Wallace, with the theme to Dude in Distress. music, Dude in Distress, Gum Wallace's theme to a comic by S.A.B., who I always used to call Easy B, which I think is a really cool name. But yeah, he's S.A.B. Or they are S.A.B., I should say. Well, let's talk about this topic. So the topic here is immersion, which is what happens when you're, consuming media. Oh, I should write that down. Consuming media. I always try and think of what's the general term that describes not only reading comics and playing games and watching movies and all these different things. You can't say reading, watching, participating, being an audience member. Consuming media. There we are. That applies to everything. That's our meta term. So when you're consuming media, what happens is, if things go right, you can become immersed in it. So the worries and problems of the character become your own worries and concerns. The threats to their world are threats that you start to care about, which is quite different from when, say, you're watching a horror film and, it's the blood's a bit fake and everything's a bit hyper and silly and you're just laughing at what's happening. So you're not really immersed in it. So that's what often happens, I think, to me when I watch horror films. And I like that. I like not being immersed in horror films. Because when I am immersed in that and I really care about the character, I absolutely hate that. I hate being immersed in those films. I don't want to be feeling scared or vulnerable for the character. That's awful. It makes me feel like shit. So,
Yeah, I'm not a fan either. I mean, especially if it's the type of horror where basically everybody dies. I hate that if I'm immersed. So
yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? So immersion is not always a great thing.
yeah.
And actually, yeah, speaking of that, there are a lot of stories where you can become immersed, and such. They're not horror stories, but say so many bad things happen to the character that it either breaks your immersion, which is a good thing where it just happens by itself, or you have to break yourself from being immersed because you start to feel like so shitty from reading this or watching this or whatever, that it's damaging to your mental health pretty much, that if you take this on board for 2 years. So then you really have to cut your own immersion off so you can get out of it and start looking at it as an external person. Say, okay, so many bad things have happened to this character. Why don't they just kill themselves? And then the story will be over, and then I won't be compelled to finish it. They'll just end it all, and it won't be a problem anymore. But yeah, so that's interesting. But what I really want to talk about is the fun part of immersion, though, not the bad part. It's actually you're enjoying this thing so much that you want to live in this world almost, that something bad happens to the character and you care about them. You want them to succeed. You don't want those characters to say mean things. You want the good things that they've done to be recognized and them to be lauded for all the the great good luck they had, or that excellent bit of sword fighting they did. You want other characters to go, oh yeah, good job, and then you feel like it's good job to you almost. Because they're your proxy pretty much when you have a main character, but it's not so much that, it's just you care for this main character and you want them to succeed. It's not, I don't think it's really the proxy thing so much. I think that happens sometimes, but it's more about like a treasured son or treasured child or whatever. Or a good friend. You want this person to win.
And I think they become, actually that's what they become. They become a good friend, and you want good things to happen to them. And like, I remember, if you can remember, what was the first movie that made you very immersed?
Oh, I would have a really hard time thinking of that. I can think of the first kind of storybooks that had me really immersed, with things like The Hobbit and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. those C.S. Lewis, Tolkien kind of books. I was really immersed in those. What about you?
Okay, so we have as a kid with books. I remember that the first thing I was really immersed in was a set of fairy tales. Actually, not a set of. Let me think. Um, okay, it was this story um, by Penelope Delta. She's one of the top tier, Greek children's books authors, and she had a series of books for kids. One was featuring a dog, and this dog was like a stray, more or less like Lady and the Tramp without the lady, just the tramp. and we follow his journey as a puppy, and then how he meets this family, and stuff like that. He gets through some adventures, and he has to deal with other stray dogs and stuff like that. And that was so immersive. Like you really cared about this dog. There was, I think he's easily, like if you ask any Greek person, at least of my cohort, uh, what is the single most beloved dog in literature? They are not going to tell you Lassie. They're going to tell you Magas, what's his name, the stray dog's name. Magas means little, like a savvy guy, street smart. That is the meaning of it. So he was like super beloved. But then I think might have mentioned that in some other cast way back when. She had this basically incurable case of depression because she was not allowed to. She came from a aristocratic family, and she was not allowed to marry this guy that she wanted to marry. And ever since then, she went into this depressive slump. So every book that she wrote was not for kids. And it actually veered into the political as well, because the guy that she liked was a very high prominent political figure that got assassinated as well, by the way. So the second book where she writes about this dog, the dog dies. So
goodness me.
Yeah, and I remember that was the first book where I cried, and I cried. I mean, I don't not just like a little tear up and stuff. I bawled my eyes out because the dog died, and the guy.
Dear.
I mean, the dog becomes friends with a boy, and they grow up together. So in the second book, we see what happens because he has to go to war and stuff. Not exactly war. It's very complicated because history in Greece is complicated. And eventually he and the dog die. In a very ignominious manner as well. Like it's not a good death, and it does nobody any good.
Okay.
And I remember that I was devastated. I refused to finish the book for the longest time because he does not die at the end of the book. He dies 2/3 in, and oh my God, I still remember the grief at this character, these characters that died.
You feel real emotion for them, real grief, real happiness. It's amazing. It's you take them on as real entities in your head. It's just incredible. Even though they're just words that you read on a page or characters you see in a movie or whatever, you still have a world for them, which makes the media way more of an interesting experience to participate in. I think that's what happens when you're watching, when you get into a long TV series, something that you really enjoy. That can happen. You can become immersed, not as strongly as you can in a book, but you can. Yeah. The characters have a life to you. They can be sort of become real people, and you want to see more of their world. I remember in a book, the first time when I really had that reaction, I think was when I remember it was in The Hobbit, when I really loved that book. You know, everything happens to Bilbo, and you really kind of enjoy his exploits and the stuff he has to deal with, like the spiders in Mirkwood and all that, fighting them with Sting, and trying to escape the wood elves. Well, with the wood elves or something about the wood elves. Anyway, he was on a barrel, but the time when it really affected me is when I can't really remember it now, but it was something that happened where all the dwarves thought he betrayed them or something when he was trying to get gold from Smaug, I think, and he didn't betray them. He absolutely didn't. But something happened, and they thought that he did, and he was really, really sad, and that really affected me as a reader. Going, oh my God, it's not fair! Oh, how could you do this to him? Oh,
Yeah, yeah, I know. Oh my God, yes. I actually, The Hobbit didn't bring me as much, but that I think is because I read it after Lord of the Rings. Um, the first encounter I had with Tolkien was Lord of the Rings,
okay.
and I was actually very immersed in that story, um, and I loved Frodo as a character. He was awesome, which is why I really have an issue with all the like the adaptations on film, because I don't know what it is about this character, but they completely nerf him like every single time. It's like, or they show him as this weird, crybaby that whimpers all the way to Mordor, which is definitely not what he does. And I remember feeling so much like I really identified with him and all his inner struggles, because he, like, Tolkien describes how he feels inside and his fears, and how he has to dig deep inside him to find this strength to carry on with something that is basically unfair, that he is saddled with it in the first place. And it's amazing. The only thing that broke me out of the immersion in Tolkien was when he forgets himself and talks about like the blades of grass, and has 3 million poems, one, back to back, and talks about Luthien. And,
Right,
and
yeah.
like, I'm not interested in that. Thank you. Can we please go on to the story?
Yeah, he likes to include his backstory stuff, doesn't he? His history. Silmarillion. Yeah, it was a bit weird, Tom Bombadil and stuff like that as well, and
Actually,
I
Tom
liked it.
Bombadil, I really liked the sequence because it was a bit like a horror story. Like, they go into this tomb, and they have this wraith there that already is being drawn to the ring, and it's like, really horror stuff. I mean, I had no problem with that.
It was just a world apart, because Tom Bombadil doesn't fit into the world of the Lord of the Rings in any kind of structured way like all the other characters do. I think it's a really kind of weird, fun little sidetrack, but it is strange. And then we have stories about the older characters, the one you mentioned, and the bear kind of character, and the jewel and everything like that. And they can be all a bit outside of the purview of what these characters are going through, which is very, like, that's super high fantasy stuff, sagas, epics, whereas the stuff our little hobbits are experiencing is much more lower down to earth. Literally and figuratively, it really is. They're dealing with real world kind of problems in their world, not this fantasy epics and things in any way. Not even in a kind of like virtual way. None of their things can be related to those kind of fantasy, those higher epics. They're far more kind of real and small. But yeah, I was quite immersed in those stories, and I really enjoyed them. I would definitely put them up there in terms of immersion. And fantasy too, for me, that is something that I was often immersed in. Like I say, Remedy Feist. I might have mentioned it in a QUACKCAST before, but in the excellent Remedy Feist story, let's see, what was it called? Magician. So Magician's a fantastic story about two characters that grow up together as like boyhood friends and then become kind of heroes of the world sort of thing, which is a really cool thing to follow them. And I think it's in the second story in the series, one of these characters is fighting this Dreadlord, which is some sort of demon, and he gets his arm chopped off. And I was horrified, thinking, "Oh my god, he had such power! He's such a incredible character, and I love him. And he's just been totally nerfed in this way. He's had his arm chopped off. Oh my god, how could this happen to him?" So I was like really feeling for the character. And the funny thing is, like, I felt so strongly, but I'd already read that story before. I knew what happened, and even though I knew what happened, and I knew it wasn't as bad as what I thought it was still so well written, and like the twists and turns was so strong in there that it fooled me a second time.
Yeah. I mean, you cannot really escape the immersion if it is, on that level. Even when you reread something, it still grips you and pulls you in. And I remember there was this. This is not happy immersion, but I'm still glad I was immersed. Like in my age, and it sounds like an old woman, but in my cohort had quote unquote children's books that were brutal. And when I say brutal, I mean it wasn't just like allegories of stuff that you have to teach kids to be aware of and stuff. It was like full on brutal blood, guts, starvation, death from exposure, death from capitalism, death from communism, death from whatever, death everywhere. there was a lot of that pattern in the sense that I remember in a lot of books they would teach you that if you you could make mistakes and be forgiven, but if you made the mistake, then fate would just squish you, and no point of no return after a point. So I remember there was this set of stories that were historical, and they were stories of children during the occupation, and it was classed as a children's book, and it's not. There was this idea that if the main character is a kid, it is for children. And so this set of stories traumatized me because they were so well written. And you didn't have like super action and stuff like that in them. You had mainly small problems, quote unquote small. I mean, a kid wants to find something to eat. That's the plot. And you follow this kid trying to find something to eat. But going through this, I mean, you are so immersed that first of all, I remember that after I had read this and I went down to lunch, I was like feeling that I have to appreciate food because I went through this in the story. That's how well immersed it was. And I still remember very vividly. I'm not going to narrate it here because it's depressing. But I remember every single story and every single anguish and death and issue that these kids had to face. And I mean, it stayed with me. And I still, even though I'm making, a story about, the occupation and stuff, I still could not bring myself to put little stories like this inside, at least not yet. maybe I will grow a spine, in the next chapter, not this chapter. But yeah, so there was that. But I'm still very happy that I was this immersed because it felt like you were there, and that you could feel something that you cannot experience right now. Thankfully.
Reminds me of the Graveyard of the Fireflies by Hiyome Miyazaki, which is
Oh my God! Yes.
quite an affecting sort of story.
Oh my God! That was like, and I was so lucky that I happened to read those stories right about the time where I also saw that. So that was like,
Okay. That's a double whammy there.
yeah. But it was good because the one was from the perspective of people siding with the Allies, and the other from the perspective of people having sided with the Axis, and it made me feel for them as well, which is, I think, very crucial for kids to get both experiences. So
Yeah. Stories can be very important when they immerse you for those kind of experiences, and you realize, actually, these war isn't a glorious experience. It's actually a really hard, awful thing to be involved in, and you want to avoid it if you can.
Yeah. But going on the happier stuff, where I remember one movie that I was very immersed in as a kid was Willow. I don't know if you remember it.
Oh yeah, Willow. That's a fantastic movie for all ages.
Oh my God, I love that. I must have seen it like 20 times or something like that. The VHS just broke after a point. So
a lot of people say it's it's a Lord of the Rings sort of knockoff, but it has small people. Sure, that's the only commonality with Lord of the Rings there is, really. It's fantasy and it has small people. Come on.
Yeah, but they are not hobbits, and they are different. And yeah, and there is Bab Morda in this movie. Like Bab Morda is one of the coolest villains. I wish there was more of her in the movie as well.
It's a fun little thing. Warwick Davis, he's the star, isn't he? He's a little tiny fella. Yes. And Val Kilmer is in it as well.
Yes.
The lady...
He plays the Han Solo character.
Yeah, Mad Mardigan. I can't remember who the lady was. Maybe he had a relationship with her or something.
Sorsa.
Yeah, that might be it. Yeah. And it was such a good film. It was one of the first fantasy films I remember actually being good, because there were so many fantasy ones that just weren't, and they had good armor that looked awesome in this film. So everything about it just looked good, which really helped immerse you, and you cared for these little characters more. I think I identified with little Warwick Davis's character more than I identified with the Mad Mardigan Val Kilmer character.
Same. Yeah. Well, you can't not identify with him. He's a family guy, really, and he has to leave his wife and baby and stuff to take care of this other baby that is huge compared to his normal kids and stuff. And it's awesome. It's awesome, and he's totally like a dad. And compared to Mad Mardigan, who is completely not a dad, and he tries to give the baby licorice at some point, and he's saying like, "You don't give the baby licorice."
He's terrible.
Yeah,
he's a fool. Well, that's good. Apparently, they're coming out with a TV series. I'm not sure how good that will be, but it will be a series starring Warwick Davis and younger actors. So, not sure how that'll go.
I would be very skeptical. I would have preferred that they didn't touch it, actually, to be honest.
Yeah. Don't know whether we'll have the same immersion in that as we did. Yeah. It's hard to think of movies. I imagine there are lots of movies that I've got immersion in. It's just hard to think of that at the time. It's just something I'll have to... Books is very easy for me to think of. I
Yeah.
immersed in most books that I read. I just really enjoy them.
Same.
Except for it's harder to get immersed in really kind of classical literature. Often,
No.
like Jane Austen's, all that kind of stuff, because they're a bit too genteel and very mannered in the writing. So it's not very it's not too kind of personal and real. It's more mannered, and there's a bit of a separation between you and it. Although saying that, the translation of the Odyssey that I read, it's a very old translation. I can't remember who it was by, but it's like the translation would have been like the 17th century or something like this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all in like verse. It's all written in as a poem, but in English. Mm-hmm. And you'd think, well, 17th century, and it's all written in a verse, like in a rhyme, like almost like doggerel, because to make all this kind of stuff rhyme, you're not going to come up with really kind of clever rhymes for a really big long story. You think, well, that's going to put massive saturation and just destroy all kind of emotion. But it doesn't, because the rhyming is so constant. You tune it out and you get into the story, and the manneredness of it doesn't affect you anymore, and you find yourself actually slipping into it more. So I was quite immersed in that story in a really, really strong way. So I was shocked that I was immersed in such an old story written in rhyme all the way through.
I liked the Odyssey a lot, but the one that I was immersed in was the Iliad a lot more. Like the Iliad for me, I think that if anyone reads my text and sees how I write battles in my fantasy story, a very big influence on how I write battles is the Iliad. And like the whole goriness and the stuff, and the way that the battle is structured, and how we look at different parts of the battle and stuff. Totally, I have been influenced by the Iliad, because I really love the way that he describes battles. It's awesome. You are there. You are immersed. You can see them fighting. You can see them strategizing. And then you can see the gods battling, which I hate. And that was something that I really hate. Like, stop. Please stop.
Stop with the gods.
So when Diomedes just threw his spear at Aphrodite, I was like,
I don't remember too much god stuff in the Odyssey. They didn't really do as much.
There is a lot. Just not as like, they don't interfere as much as they do, because in the Iliad they are actually pretty
participating.
Important characters in the whole story. They're not just Deus ex machina. They are there. Actually, they propel the plot a lot of the time. So in the Odyssey, it's more like they are watching and they appear at choice moments. So it's not as prominent.
Yeah, they appear at choice moments to help out or to do the opposite of helping.
Yes. Except Athena. I mean, Athena is always, like, she has Odysseus back always. She's always there, like, to the point that it's like, that's at this point it's getting disgusting. Like, stop helping him this much. He doesn't need that much help. Stop.
It's not even an Athenian. He's an Ithacan, for goodness sake. And then there's he's an Ithacan. He's not an Athenian too, so it's not her purview. Yes. And then there's bloody Poseidon, who's just a stroppy bastard and just angry about everything. So it's not fair. It's just fuck him. I hate him.
Well, he did blind his son, so there's that. So.
Oh yeah, but it's just everything against bloody Odysseus and his crew, who they don't even matter.
I think like I like the Odyssey. I didn't like all of the Odyssey. There were parts that I really loved, but I somehow consider them sequels to the Iliad in a sense. And one was when he goes down to Hades and he sees all his old comrades in a sense, and they talk about basically life and death and stuff, and then they propel the plot, and then is the last part when he finally arrives at Ithaca and he throws down with his son.
That's pretty cool, though. With all the planning and stuff that happens. Oh, geez, that is the most immersive part. Like coming back for revenge.
Yes. Like more of that, please. I want to see him like do it.
And they really do get revenge. That's an act. That was pure 80s action movie. That was so immersive, and it was so 80s in the the action. Steven Seagal, when he was good, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Rambo, sort of.
And it's not fat shaming. It's just that he looks like a very non-talented tower right now. So
he's an obelisk.
Yes. So yeah, that was awesome. I really liked that part, and all the ancient customs and stuff I really liked. But the story that I really liked from ancient stuff, and I felt really immersed in, was actually a play, and it is Iphigenia in Tauris, and or Taurus, or whatever, I don't know. Tavrida is in Greek, and it's the story of Iphigenia after she has been, offered up by her father to Artemis, in order, as a sacrifice, in order to have wind so the ships can sail to Troy. And if you remember the myth, Artemis comes in and swipes her before she gets killed, and now she's a priestess in a temple of Artemis in this barbarian city. And it is a barbarian city because they practice full-blown human sacrifice, and whoever is unlucky enough to come to their shores gets sacrificed to Artemis. So when her brother comes to fetch her, basically, he doesn't, like, he happens to her shores, and then they recognize each other, and then they have to figure out how she can live without, all of them getting killed. Very ceremoniously killed. Yeah. So that's an awesome story, and I really love it every single time. Especially the scene where they realize they recognize each other is amazing, and you like everyone there, and you really don't want them to be killed.
Well, I'm thinking of other things that really immerse me, and sci-fi a lot. My taste kind of shifted, so things like Dune is an incredibly well-written book. It's quite immersive because the world is so well thought out and very real to you when you're reading it. You can become immersed in it very easily, and I think that really bears out because it's so popular. It's been turned into like 3 movies or even more. It's been turned into a whole bunch of movies and TV series and computer games and all sorts of things because people become immersed in it and they feel for it and they enjoy it. So it's something that it has legs. So Dune is a particular one that influenced me a lot. It's hard to think of many others though. Now we talked about games before. You mentioned your the Wizard game. For me, it was a lot of different JRPGs. That's a Japanese role-playing games, and these were the early ones that chibi characters who are very kind of stylized in their rendering, very cute. But the thing is, because everything is very cute and you're kind of moving along in a grid and all this kind of thing, because it's so stylized, your brain has to work extra hard to fill in the details and make it real. And because your brain does that, it becomes more immersive and more real to you. I don't know, that's my explanation. I don't actually know. but to me, that feels right. So in those games, as you pick up a bit of the story here, a bit of the story there, from usually, you know, talking to this character in a village, that character in a village, this dog, this chicken. you talk to these characters, then something happens, and then you go back to talk to the characters, see what's changed, and you pick up a bit of the story, you know, the character's name, the relationships between characters. Oh, these characters have some kind of story together. Oh, I better do a side quest and find their thing in order for them to be a bit more happy, or whatever. And then you have a relationship with the characters, you have a relationship with the main character, and you care about that little world and the progression of it, and it's fun.
I remember, like, not that you mentioned it in the game, in the Wizard game that I play, that I had been roped into a side quest that I really hated because you had to go find and pick up some weird flowers here and there, you know, in the entire area, which is boring. When they get you, you know, to fetch stuff, it's boring. And so I gather the stuff to just, then I'm telling myself, okay, I'm done. I'm not going to continue with the side quest after I, you know, complete this task. I'm going to decline the rest. But then when I gave in the stuff, the characters have this issue with a kid that is not doing very well and stuff. And I felt that I cannot stop and leave them hanging like that and continue with the mission. And I just completed the entire side quest just so that they could be happy and have their kid back and stuff. So, it's like, oh my God, what are you doing to me? Fine, I'll accept the fucking mission.
You'll help these stupid characters. Well, yeah, that happens with Mass Effect, I think, which was quite a popular game because it's got a story to it. Like the fighting, the fighting's like really badly done. Like it's not very well programmed. It's very kind of basic point and click kind of stuff, really. But the story in it is so cool, and because the character, like the voice acting, is so great. And, you know, what the characters do and, you know, their concerns and cares, you really do get into it. It's quite an immersive game in a lot of ways. And you follow these characters in over 3, you know, games across several years. It took for these all to come out, and you follow them and the changes that happen with them. And it can be pretty cool and rewarding. So, yeah, that's a good example of one that is immersive. Even if the gameplay is really just arse.
Yeah, it's I mean, in my game, it's a turn-based, so it's all point and click, which is the type of game I like because I fear that I will break the keyboard if I have to do more than point and click. So I don't do that.
In Mass Effect, it is like the fighting is like a first-person shooter, but it's so basic that it feels like point and click because it's just, it's the most basic version of a shooter you can possibly get.
Okay. No, I mean, in our game, that's how immersed I am that it's our game. It's like everyone who plays this game. So anyway, the gameplay is basically, you know, you take turns, you program what you want your character to do, and when the turn comes, they just go ahead and do it. The character does it. You don't do it in real time like a shoot 'em up or something like that. So you have spells and cards, and you have to strategize for your spell to have the biggest possible impact on the enemy by the way that you program how to build up the spell, which is also pretty nice. It's like a weird game of solitaire, I guess.
Which helps you
But
get a bit more involved in it because you have to do the planning and the thinking. It's not going to be the same result every time.
No.
Which is actually, that's why that was another thing about the JRPGs. They started off being turn games. I mean, they were all turn games, really, because these weren't real time things. All the time when you fought an enemy, especially these great ones called Shining Force 2, Shining Force 3, you'd basically have a whole battle force. You'd pick up like friends along the way, these people who are followers. Through all the missions, you'd solve their mission, they'd become your friend, and in the end, when you got to fight, the enemies, you'd have a huge battle because all these people you picked up would all be in your team and they'd all be ready to fight, and you'd have to pick the actions of every single one of them, saying, okay, you fight this guy, you go around here, you sneak around there, you fight him, and it would take forever to do a battle. It just, because you'd have to, move, set out your turns, your spells and everything, and then the enemy would do it, then you do it again, and blah, blah. So, but it immersed you. It was just amazing. So,
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's how a game can be immersive, in that you have to invest in it, and then your investment brings forth a reward that justifies the investment in a sense, like the gratification that you get from completing the task is enough that you want to invest again, for the next stage.
Exactly. I've just thought of some movies that I've got immersed in, but it's not good. Because Star Wars. Same answer every single frickin' time.
Star Wars?
Yeah, the first one. The classic, going up to the Death Star and, having the lightsaber battles and all that kind of stuff.
Honestly, I became invested in Star Wars from the second movie onwards. Like the first one was okay. I mean, I enjoyed it. I don't remember feeling wowed by it. Like, it was fun. It was space wizards. Excellent. But then the second movie, I remember I was like quite young when I saw it, and I expected it to be basically a nice, happy ending second installment, and it really wasn't. And things were going from bad to worse. And I was feeling like, aren't we going toward the end of the movie? Like, why isn't anything getting corrected in this? And all the struggle of Luke was what hooked me in. And then the third movie for me is the most enjoyable. If you take out the Ewoks really threw me off. But everything else, yes.
Nub, job, yeah. Well, I'd say it's pretty much the same thing for me too. I saw the second movie first, and I was just blown away. I was just, oh my god, is this really what this sci-fi is about? This is just, and then it sort of spoiled me because no other sci-fi for years was as good as that. Like, it just didn't exist. But then I saw the first one, where everything had begun, and that was pretty cool. Yeah, and then the second one, oh my god, so affecting. Oh, Luke, I am your father. He doesn't say that he does. I can't remember, but there's that moment, and Luke's shock at Darth Vader being his dad, or claiming
and that's of just hurt and despair, like when he says all. Like, it's the one line that really resonates and fits. Like, no, I really don't want this to be.
It's actual pain. Yeah. No, I don't want.
Yeah, do not want.
Do not. That's a very affecting film. Yeah, I remember now thinking of that along those lines. Last Starfighter, which is a bit of a silly film, and they say it kind of apes Star Wars in a way. And Battle Beyond the Planet. So these two films that are like the American films that sort of ape Star Wars. They're heroic fantasies, and they really do kind of give you that kind of immersion for the character in, like, yay, I want him to win, yay, battling, like getting better and better and better, and then beating the enemy at the end, that kind of thing, which is great for kids. Yeah. I love that kind of thing.
Yeah, I love that kind of story, and I think that's why I was speaking of super immersion for years. I cannot not say that I had this experience with Kenshin and Rurouni Kenshin and his story, and because he had everything. He was a pacifist. He used to be like everyone's nightmare fuel assassin. He has this persona that he struggles with when the rage hits, and he sort of switches back to that old assassin personality, and he still is not good enough for certain enemies, and he has to build himself up, first of all to control his own self, and then to be able to match the skill set of other samurai and stuff. And that was amazing, because his progress as a swordsman mirrors a lot his psychological progress as a person, and it's so awesome in the way that he struggles without it being like super melodramatic and stuff like that, although it could definitely be. I mean, and nobody would blame the story. So that I really love that, and especially in the manga. I like the anime as well, but the manga, I think, is where the gloves are off.
Yeah.
In all of that. So.
Well, it wouldn't be complete without me mentioning that I was really absorbed in this particular story I was reading, and then the author just suddenly killed off one of the main characters, and I thought, oh my god, how could you do that? I love that character. Yeah, that was Tanserine Without Moonlight, and I'll never not mention that.
Oh my god, really? You felt that? Oh my god, I'm so honored. Thank you.
Of course. Jeez, that's still a gut punch when Basil gets shot by that sniper. Well, spoiler for anyone who's reading it. But yeah.
It happened long ago, technically. But honestly, if it's any consolation, I really cried myself a lot as I was drawing it. So, which was really funny because I was drawing and crying. Like that in the meme. That kid in a small, like, young master chef that turns over a steak and is crying. That was me. I hated that. I tried to not draw that.
Well,
I'm glad that someone shares my pain.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that was a big moment for me when I was reading that, and stuff like that when you're reading it, or when you're like watching a movie or whatever, and something happens to one of the main characters who you invested in. I suppose for a lot of people, it's like Game of Thrones is a good example. It kind of rocks your world, because then you have to reestablish your balance with this thing, your relationship with it. It's like, wow, I was just like standing on this solid flooring here, and this is being ripped away from me. What do I do now? I have to find a new balance. I need to find a new bit of wood to cling to. This has left me adrift somewhat, and that's the experience of what happens when you are so immersed in something. You can't separate your real world from that fantasy experience that you're consuming, which is the beauty of it.
Yeah.
Even when it can be affecting.
So, that's one thing I really loved, but I also really hated about Game of Thrones, like the first seasons. I have not read the books, and I will not read the books for other reasons, but I will not read them unless they all, get completed. Then I will read them. But like up until season 5 and maybe season 6, it was awesome in the sense that you were afraid for these characters because you were afraid that the choices that they make will lead to their doom, and that's I cannot imagine something more immersive than that. Like, please don't be stupid. Please don't do this. Oh, you did this. Okay, all right. Like that thing, which of course is destroyed, like spoiler. But in the last 2 seasons, it goes a little bit down the drain, or a lot.
Yeah, then they remove your immersion by just being silly.
Yeah, and that's like that's like starting very nice with the like with the introduction to stuff, and then being left with nothing. So that can be super frustrating when it happens as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that can break immersion, like people not paying attention to what they've written before, putting plot holes in. Plot holes are basically, I set something up and I didn't complete it, or I just completed it in a lazy way, like taking you out of the world by being really bad with the history. That kind of thing can happen, or logic. Characters doing illogical things, characters doing things that aren't in the story logic. Like, it might be logical for a real person, but this character would never have done that because that's not part of their personality. That's been established in the first 100 pages, and they're acting out of character. All that kind of thing. That can mess you up.
Yeah.
So yeah, retaining immersion is a difficult thing, but for once you are immersed, it is a beautiful and rewarding and lovely thing to be immersed, especially in a good story that you're enjoying.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best things. It's not easy to do. Well, we should wrap up the QUACKCAST. We're about an hour long, and Google hasn't set up any automatic warnings, which I don't know. It's
Google is immersed.
Yeah,
it's forgotten itself.
It's so immersed it's forgotten what it's doing. Well, thank you very much for listening to QUACKCAST number 566.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.